bitter millionaire certain his new maid would eventually steal from him, set a cruel trap to prove his cynical worldview was right. But the simple, unexpected thing she did when faced with his open safe didn't just prove him wrong. It shattered his entire reality and completely broke the man he thought he was. The silence in the Ashworth mansion was a currency all its own. It was a heavy, opulent silence, woven from the threads of old money and deep-seated corrosive loneliness. It lived in the cavernous marble hallways, clung to the velvet draperies that blotted out the sun, and was measured by the soft, relentless ticking of a centuries-old grandfather clock in the main hall, a sound that echoed like a slow, patient countdown to nothing at all. And tonight, in the heart of that silence, in the master's private study, a trap was meticulously set. The door to the walk-in safe, a fortress of hardened steel and complex tumblers that had cost more than a suburban home, stood wide, invitingly open. If you believe that a single act of integrity can be more powerful than all the money in the world, and that no person is beyond redemption, do us a favor and subscribe to our channel for more stories that restore your faith in humanity. And let us know in the comments, what is the one quality you value most in another person? Inside the vault, the spectacle was designed to be obscene. Stacks of $100 bills bound in crisp paper bands from the bank lay like bricks of pure, unadulterated temptation. Ropes of gold necklaces and diamond bracelets, spoils from a bitter divorce, glittered beside them, catching the low light from the desk lamp and scattering miniature, mocking rainbows across the cold steel shelves. It was a dragon's hoard, a king's ransom, a life-altering, dream-making fortune left open for the taking. Hidden just beyond the mahogany arch of the adjoining library, shrouded in deep shadows, Alexander Ashworth watched. He was a man twice over a millionaire, but in the currency of the human soul he was bankrupt. His eyes, narrowed and sharp like a hawk's, were not filled with anger but with a cold, clinical, almost desperate anticipation. He was a scientist observing a grim experiment, and he was tragically certain of the outcome. He knew her schedule down to the minute. He knew she would pass through here. The maid, Camila. He was testing her, but on a deeper level he was testing his own bitter philosophy, a cynical creed forged in the fires of 1,000 betrayals. That every person, no matter how pure they seemed on the surface, had a breaking point. A price. He wanted to see her falter. He needed to see her falter to prove to himself that the fortress of cynicism he had built around his heart was constructed on the solid ground of truth, not on the shifting, pathetic sands of his own brokenness. And yet, as he watched his housemaid enter the room and pause before the gaping maw of the open safe, her simple presence a quiet rebuke to the room's opulence. He never could have imagined that what would unfold in the next few agonizing minutes would utterly unravel him, breaking open a heart he didn't even know he still had. The housemaid's name was Camila. She was 32, slender and reserved, with deep, soulful brown eyes that held the weight of stories she never told and sorrows she never shared. She had been working in the sprawling Ashworth estate for just over 7 months. To the small, rotating staff, and certainly to Alexander, she was a ghost in a simple gray uniform, a shadow that moved silently through the polished marble corridors, leaving everything immaculate and sterile in her wake. But Camilla's life outside these hallowed, silent walls was anything but immaculate. It was a chaotic, desperate scramble for survival. She was a widow, her husband, Marco, taken by a sudden, brutal illness 2 years prior, leaving her with nothing but his memory and a mountain of debt. She was the mother of 2 young daughters, 7-year-old Sophia and 5-year-old Luna, whose bright, innocent smiles were the twin suns of her universe, the only things that warmed her. And she was the sole caregiver for her own mother, Elena, who was locked in a quiet, losing battle with cancer in a crowded, underfunded public hospital downtown. Camila was a woman moving silently, relentlessly, through a storm of pain and fear, her own needs long since forgotten. Every morning she arrived at the Ashworth estate before sunrise, tying her dark hair back into a neat, severe bun, slipping into her drab uniform, and beginning her tasks without a single word of complaint. Her paycheck from Alexander Ashworth was the fragile, fraying thread holding her entire world together. Alexander Ashworth, the reclusive millionaire who had inherited his fortune but never earned a single moment of peace, had spent his life building and protecting his empire. People had stolen from him, betrayed him, used him until he was hollowed out. His ex-wife, a woman he had once adored, had taken a fortune in the divorce, along with his trust and love, leaving him with little more than a collection of jewelry he couldn't bear to look at. A former business partner, his best friend from university, had siphoned millions from their shared company, taking with him his faith and friendship. He had learned the hard, bitter way that loyalty was a commodity, and his immense wealth made him a target for the world's endless greed. And so he had built walls, impenetrable steel ones around his vault, and thicker, colder, more formidable ones around his heart. When Camilla had arrived, recommended by a trusted agency, there was something different about her that unsettled him. She didn't flatter him. She didn't ask personal questions. She never lingered in rooms longer than she had to. She was, by every record and background check he had secretly run on her, painfully, almost unnervingly, clean. It bothered Alexander on a primal level. Her quiet, unwavering integrity felt almost threatening, too pure to be real in his sullied world. It was a dissonance he couldn't resolve, a single, clear note of harmony in his symphony of suspicion. That's when he devised the test, the ultimate cruel test. One Wednesday morning, just before Camilla was scheduled to dust his private study, Alexander arranged the scene. He unlocked the vault, swung the heavy steel door wide open, and made sure the contents were dazzlingly, sickeningly visible. He then instructed his head of security, a stoic ex-military man named Peterson, to temporarily disable the motion sensors and the single camera in the hallway. "Sir, are you certain about this?" Peterson had asked, his face a mask of professional concern, the only person on staff who dared to question his employer. "That's a significant exposure, a risk I cannot recommend." "I am certain, Peterson," Alexander had replied, his voice cold and final. "No one will know this moment happened except for me. I need to know. I need to be sure." He wanted to see what Camilla would do when faced with a temptation that could solve every single one of her problems in an instant. The crushing hospital bills for her mother, the future education of her daughters, the constant gnawing threat of eviction. It could all vanish with one quick, desperate, and, in his mind, entirely predictable act. Would she falter? Would she take just a single bundle of cash? Or was she truly as unshakable as she appeared? Was anyone? He hid himself in the adjoining library, a room filled with books he never read, peering through a small gap in the ornate doorway, his heart pounding with a strange mixture of dread and a perverse, sorrowful anticipation. Camilla entered the room at exactly 8:42 a.m. She didn't notice the safe at first, her focus entirely on her task. She moved to the grand oak desk, her duster gliding over its polished surface. It wasn't until the morning sunlight streaming through the tall French windows hit the gleaming steel door of the vault and bounced a sharp, intrusive glare across the Persian rug that she saw it. She stopped mid-step, her duster frozen in her gloved hand. Her eyes, wide with a mixture of shock and terror, went from the gaping safe to the hallway, then back again. Nothing. Silence. Only the soft, mocking ticking of the grandfather clock. Her breath caught in her throat. She stood utterly still for a long, agonizing moment, staring at the open vault as if it were a mirage, an impossible vision of hope and damnation all at once. From his hiding place, Alexander's heart hammered against his ribs. Here it comes, he thought, a bitter, triumphant sorrow rising in him like bile. This is the moment. This is where the mask of piety always falls. This is the truth of people. He watched as she approached the safe, her steps slow, hesitant, almost fearful. She was drawn to it, a moth to a catastrophic flame. Her fingers, slender and trembling slightly, hovered just over the stacks of money. Alexander held his breath, leaning forward. He could almost feel the rough texture of the $100 bills under her fingertips, the cold, heavy weight of the gold. This was it, the proof he needed. But she touched nothing. Instead, in a gesture so unexpected, so utterly confounding that it completely short-circuited Alexander's cynical brain, she reached for the clean, folded polishing rag tucked into her apron. She leaned forward, her face still a mask of shock, and softly, gently, began wiping the dust from the safe's gleaming outer edge. She was careful, precise, her movements meticulous, ensuring she didn't smudge the steel or shift a single bundle inside. She didn't count the money. She didn't glance around greedily. She simply cleaned the trap he had set for her with the same quiet, focused dignity she used on every other surface in his vast, empty mansion. Alexander felt a strange, unfamiliar pang in his chest, a flicker of something he couldn't name. But the true, heart-shattering moment was yet to come. After she finished cleaning the edge of the safe, Camilla did something else. She reached into the pocket of her simple uniform and pulled out a small, folded photograph, its corners creased and softened with time and countless touches. She glanced nervously towards the hallway once more, as if needing to be absolutely certain she was alone for this private, sacred ritual. She unfolded the picture and held it in her palm. Alexander couldn't see the image, but he could see the profound change in her expression. A look of fierce love mixed with a deep, gut-wrenching pain. She stared at the photo, her lips moving in a silent prayer, a whispered promise. Then, with a tenderness that seemed completely out of place in the cold, hard study, she brought the photo to her lips and kissed it. She folded it carefully and placed it back into her pocket, close to her heart. And then she did the one thing that finally, irrevocably broke him. Her eyes scanned the room, and for a moment, they landed on Alexander's desk. On the desk, amongst the clutter of business papers and expensive pens, sat a single, small, silver-framed photograph. It was the only personal item Alexander allowed in the room, a faded picture of a much younger, happier version of himself, standing beside a woman with a kind, warm smile. His late mother, taken by the same disease that now plagued Camilla's. The glass of the frame was smudged with fingerprints, a small sign of neglect in an otherwise immaculate room. Camilla walked over to the desk. With her clean cloth, she gently, carefully wiped the smudges from the glass of his photograph, restoring its clarity. She looked at the image of the happy young man and his mother for a long moment, a flicker of profound empathy in her eyes. Then she reached into her pocket again, but this time she pulled out a small, intricately hand-knitted bookmark, a simple, colorful thing clearly made by a child. She placed it gently on the desk, right beside his photo. A small, silent, handmade gift, an act of seeing his loneliness and offering a tiny piece of her own family's warmth. With that, she took a small step back, her duty, whatever it was, now complete. She looked at the safe one last time, and then with a quiet strength that defied all of Alexander's bitter expectations, she gently pushed the heavy steel door until it swung shut with a soft, final, definitive click. Alexander stumbled back from the doorway, pressing his hand to his chest, a sudden, violent sob catching in his throat. He couldn't breathe. He wasn't sure what he had expected. A quick, desperate hand, a stolen bill, maybe even a moment of greedy, calculating hesitation. He had been prepared for that. He had been banking on it. But what he had just witnessed was something else entirely. It was reverence. It was empathy. It was a love so fierce and a character so pure that it had reached into his fortified, cynical heart and ripped it wide open. He had set a trap to catch a thief, but instead, he had been captured by an act of grace. He turned and fled down the hallway before she could exit the study and see the silent, streaming tears carving paths down the face of the man who had tried to prove her unworthy. That evening, Alexander couldn't sleep. He sat in his study, the safe now locked, but the image of it and of her was burned into his mind. He kept replaying the moment over and over, the photograph of her family, the quiet, desperate kiss, the gentle cleaning of his mother's picture, the safe, untouched, and the bookmark. That simple, colorful, hand-knitted bookmark now sat in the center of his vast, empty desk, a searing testament to his own spiritual poverty. He had a vault full of treasure, but this woman, who had nothing, had just shown him a wealth he couldn't comprehend. He realized he had not been testing her. He had been testing the world, testing the very concept of human goodness, hoping it would fail so he could remain comfortably numb in his gilded cage of misery. And he had been proven devastatingly, beautifully wrong. He realized he had judged everyone through the cracked, distorted lens of his own past wounds, and in doing so, had nearly lost sight of the rare, quiet, profound goodness standing right under his own roof. The tears that had started in the library returned, no longer silent but deep, racking sobs of a man grieving not just for his past but for the cold, empty man he had allowed himself to become. The next morning, Alexander did not leave a letter. He waited for her. He stood in the main hall when she arrived, his posture humbled, his eyes holding none of their usual cold authority. "Camila," he said, his voice hoarse, "may I have a word with you in the study?" She followed him, her face a mask of quiet apprehension, certain she was about to be fired. He closed the study door and turned to face her. "I have to confess something to you," he began, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "Yesterday, the safe, it was not an accident. It was a test, a cruel, unfair test that I set for you." He saw the flicker of hurt and shock in her eyes, and it was like a knife in his gut. "I have been betrayed many times in my life," he continued, forcing himself to be vulnerable for the first time in years. "I came to believe that everyone had a price. I thought you would steal. I wanted you to steal. Because if you did, it would prove that my world, my bitter, lonely world, was the real one." He gestured to the bookmark on his desk. "But you didn't. You did that. You cleaned my mother's photograph. You gave me something made by your daughter. In the face of all that temptation, you chose to give, not take. You have a vault inside you richer than any I could ever build. Your quiet act of dignity didn't just close a safe door, it opened my eyes." He pushed a thick folder across the desk towards her. "Your mother will be transferred to the finest private oncology center in the state this afternoon. A full treatment plan has been arranged and paid for. This," he pointed to another document, "is the deed to a house in a safe neighborhood with the city's best schools for you and your daughters. This," he pushed forward another, "is a trust fund for their education, ensuring they will never have to worry. And this," he said finally, "is a formal job offer. Not as a maid, but as the new executive director of the Ashworth Family Foundation, a charity I am establishing this morning. Your first task will be to help families like your own. Your integrity is a skill this world desperately needs." Tears streamed silently down Camilla's face, but this time they were tears of disbelief, of overwhelming relief. She had been seen, truly seen, for the first time. Alexander Ashworth had set a trap, thinking his maid would steal. What she did instead, an act of quiet dignity, of profound empathy, of selfless grace, had not only made him cry, it had broken him open and given him the one thing his millions could never buy, a reason to trust in humanity again. He had learned from the quiet maid who had nothing that the greatest treasures in the world are not locked away in safes, but are carried quietly in the human heart. If this story of transformation, integrity, and the quiet power of the human spirit touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. We are dedicated to telling stories that reveal the profound beauty of humanity. And before you go, drop a comment below and tell us, what do you believe is the true measure of a person's wealth?